Hey, welcome back to Everyday Jesus. My name is Derek. I'm so glad you're here today. One of the most important questions that you will ask yourself and that you will answer for yourself or not is who am I? What is my identity? Where do I find my identity? This is an important question because it really dictates how we live our lives, what our lives are given to. It really defines and guides all of our actions, all of our relationships. And you may or may not have explored that question. Sometimes we may not think of it in those terms, but we are all wrestling with and exploring and struggling with who we are in the world. This is a big question for Jesus as well. And I want to look real quick at what I would say is kind of the pinnacle of his Sermon on the Mount, of Jesus' Sermon on the Mount in the book of Matthew. And we're going to talk about a little bit different section of it today. But he says, "You have heard that it was said, 'You shall love your neighbor and hate your enemy.' But I say to you, love your enemy and pray for those who persecute you." This is important. "So that you may be sons of your Father who is in heaven." Now he goes on kind of explaining what it means to love and why we're called to love even our enemies. And I call this section the pinnacle of the Sermon on the Mount because it's kind of the most backwards thing that Jesus teaches. It's the most upside down way of thinking from the rest of the world that he gives. And he also gives it as kind of the defining characteristic of his people. He says, if you, and I don't mean in an earning or exchange sort of way, but he's saying, truly, if you love your enemies, you will be showing that, you will be living out your sonhood, your daughterhood to the Father who's in heaven. That identity of sonship, daughtership, I'm not quite sure how to phrase that, but that identity as a son or a daughter of the God who created you is the central identity in your life. And the Bible gives us really two options. It says we're either sons and daughters of God or we're enemies and rebels. There's no in between. There's no being an acquaintance or a casual friend of God. There's no mere participants. There's no other option. We're either beloved sons and daughters that are in right relationship as we reflect and participate in his character, or we're enemies and rebels, not honoring him, not treating him as the king and father that he is. Now, this idea of identity, again, is huge, even if we don't always see it. There's so many issues going on in the world and conflicts between people groups or racial conflict, social conflict, so many things where the core issue, the core problem, the core miss is identity. We all know, I think, deep down that we're made in the image of God, and so we have value. And that's the beginning piece of who we are as people. That's the beginning of our identity. That's the most basic truth of who we are. In our country right now, we're coming off of a verdict yesterday in a major case. Because we all see, whether we agree with the outcome or not, we all see the tragedy of time and time again in so many forms, so many ways, people treating one another as if they don't have value, as if they are not made in the image of God. We mourn and we are hurt by the reality that far too often we are not treated and we don't treat others as who they really are. Again, we know this deep down, whether we live it out or whether we don't. And so this is a core issue for Jesus, both for you and for me, and how we think of ourselves and how we act out who we are. If we're really to be followers of Jesus, if we're really going to live out what it truly means to be human, as what it truly means to be image bearers of God, of the God who made us, if we're really going to do that, it means, as Jesus says here, loving our neighbors, loving our enemies, blessing those who curse us, praying for those who persecute us. That's the fullest extent of what Jesus means when he says to love our neighbor. That's a hard challenge. And we see that we struggle with it, even as we clamor for justice, as we call out for compassion, as we call out for reconciliation. The temptation is to continue a hatred that we're reacting against, because we still struggle with who we are, what our identity is, what the other's identity is. And so, I don't want to overplay this, but I really do think that this question of identity is at the core, is at the foundation of so many issues today. And if we can begin to see the needs of others, even if we understand nothing about them, if we can see the needs of others, how often we're crying out and saying, this is my identity, this is who I am. We can begin to have compassion. And if there's an issue, if there's some maybe misguidedness or whatever, or wounding there, we can still approach it with the understanding that if I'm a follower of Jesus, I am called to love you for who you are. But at the same time to know that who you are is a son or a daughter of God, or a potential son or daughter of God. But even if we are not finding the strength or the submission to love our enemies, we're still made in the image of God. So even as we are enemies of God, we're made in his image. And he still bids us come, submit, find who you truly are. This is part of his invitation to us. Come to me and find who you truly are, so that you can treat and pour out to others for who they truly are. And I hope this isn't getting too mixed up or too muddled, but again, I think this is vitally important. I think the ways that we treat other people comes out of our understanding of who we are and our understanding of who they are. And we can see that most of the time, we don't know. So I just encourage you today to think about that. Think about how you define yourself. Do you define yourself and who you are by your activities, your hobbies, your interests, your sexual orientation, your race, your culture, your home country, whatever it is? Do you define yourself solely on those things? Of course, those are important parts that make up our character, our personality, our uniqueness. Those are not unimportant. But if we're just those things, we're missing who God truly made us to be. So I challenge you to think about that today. I challenge you to sit for a minute and ask yourself, who am I? What does that mean? How does that play out? It's not even as simple to just say, oh, okay, I'm a son of God. The question here, the question for Jesus is, how does that play out in my life? What are areas and relationships that I can play out and materialize my sonship? Who are the enemies that I need to love, that I need to bless and pray for? What are the areas in my life or things around me where I can be a redemptive presence as Jesus was, and therefore play out who I am? This is a big question. It won't happen in a day. But I encourage you to think about that. If you don't follow Jesus today, ask yourself the same question. How do I define who I am? Can I truly know if I am not connected to the God who made me? Ask that question. Wrestle with it. Struggle with it. Dig into it. We will not truly be alive as we are intended to be until we know and live out who we are and who we are in Jesus as sons and daughters of the King of God. So I just challenge you with that today. Begin a process of discovery, of exploration, of learning and figuring out what that means. I bless you with that today, and I'll see you next time.